The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. No mai, haere mai, welcome to the mother of all New Zealand politics podcast, Gone by Lunchtime. A warm welcome to Ben Thomas of Exceltium. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Toby.
You look excited. You're doing exercises. You're limbering up.
I'm making sure that my spine is in alignment for the pod. We're in the end times now.
Annabelle Lee, how are you? Nice to see you.
I'm very well. I've got a little bit of tonsillitis, to be fair, but I'm okay.
It's like Lorde did the VMAs, I think, last night or something, and performed but didn't sing. So if it comes to it,
I'm planning to do something
just
similar.
Do Morse or find some way of communicating your ideas. You could write them down.
Sounds good.
Just push them over the desk. Many thanks to KiwiSaver, provider simplicity, for unequivocally endorsing our existence, while unequivocally not endorsing anything we might say. The time is 12:55 p.m. on Tuesday, and I say that because it's important, as we pointed out before, in this whirlwind of an election, to be clear about when we are recording, so that it doesn't look like we've missed something. It's just been like that, hasn't it? You've got to keep looking all the time. It's the old Apple R election. And it looked, Ben Thomas and Annabelle Lee for a moment there, as if the Grim Reaper that has stalked much of this election so far was coming for Winston Peters on Sunday evening when he issued a press release after a flurry of teasing on the Twitter. Everyone was in a real state of near frenzy about it.
I was beside myself, to be honest. I spent the whole weekend trawling Twitter and trolling Tim Murphy's Twitter account. Tim
Murphy who is the co-founder and editor of newsroom.co.nz, former editor-in-chief of the New Zealand Herald, posted a tweet. When did he do it? Was it Saturday, wasn't it? It was Saturday afternoon.
Saturday afternoon during halftime, I think, at the Auckland Rugby High School finals at Eden Park. Right, just like Woodward and Bernstein did.
The tweet said something, people who said there was going to be another explosive contortion or something like that in the election.
One more convulsion
it was. An explosive convulsion, seismic convulsion, something like that. It was good. It wasn't quite. It
was delicious.
And he said, and then was it the hashtag, or anyway, it was going to be the mother of all scandals was coming our way.
The royal, and then a follow-up tweet, the royal flush of scandals.
Really, it very much was like an Agatha Christie tweet. And we were all desperately trying to decode this.
In Southern Hemisphere elections, the royal flush of scandals goes counterclockwise.
Scientific fact.
Let that one sink in, listeners. But then skipping forward to Sunday evening, and Winston Peters issued a kind of preemptive press release, didn't he? Which was unusually non-combative in a way.
Well, the funny thing about that is that we'd whipped ourselves into so much of a frenzy that by the time once, our imaginations had gone wild, certainly mine had. So by the time Winston let go his press release on Sunday afternoon, I was like, surely that's not it. That's not exciting and explosive and convulsy enough.
Insufficiently convulsy. The press release said there was an error, we fixed it, or something, I think was the headline on it.
I think he said there was an overpayment for his pension,
yes,
which he's been on for 7 years now. the putative next Prime Minister of New Zealand in his 7th year on national superannuation.
Prime Minister, complete tosh.
So they discovered that there was an overpayment. He didn't go into any detail about that. Said he was contacted by the Ministry of Social Development to administer the benefit. He met with them. He agreed to pay back the overpayments, and he considered the matter finished.
And then it turned out that News Hub had the story, and we weren't sure if it was also Newsroom's story, but it turned out that it was, right?
It was. I think by the time Newsroom published in the morning, the only sort of fresh element that they were able to add was that it was allegedly $18,000 that Peters had to pay back, which he said is demonstrably incorrect, and we still don't know exactly how much he paid back. But one would assume it's less than that.
He was unwilling to demonstrate it, but it was demonstrable nevertheless, because that's a word you just put in to sentences when you're Winston Peters, don't you? The Newsroom had clearly been onto it, and then so it's still subsequently Tim Murphy posted a tweet saying that he had in fact just been engaging, and he knew that Patrick Gower of News Hub had the story too, and so he was just engaging in the parody of hyperbole or something. Which is...
I think the meaning that I took from his tweet was that he wasn't even mad that he was scooped by News Hub. He thought it was funny.
Like Tupac. Yeah, mad at you. But when you watch the Facebook Live video that Paddy, Lloyd and Jenna recorded on Sunday evening, it appears, if I understood correctly, that the contact was actually made with Jenna, and Jenna passed it on to Lloyd and Paddy. I think that's the whakapapa of the mother of the auntie and
except
uncle.
Newsroom have since announced. No, News Hub have announced that it was an anonymous tip-off.
An anonymous tip-off.
So presumably a phone call came in. I think they said an anonymous phone call came into the office, and so I'm assuming that means that Jenna just happened to be the one who was eating her lunch.
And let's just remember why it's an issue, or why it could be an issue.
Let's talk about that.
Which is that it's not that he's not entitled to superannuation. Lots of New Zealand politicians have also taken universal superannuation while they've been MPs. Jim Anderton, Jonathan Hunt, a panoply. But he did claim an overpayment, or he was overpaid. And while he said that the error was entirely the Ministry of Social Development's, there is a question of how it eventuated. Did he fill in the forms wrong? And
did he tick the wrong box?
That gives rise to the question: Did he make an incorrect declaration about whether he was single or living alone, or any of those factors which influence payment levels, or can he just not fill out forms correctly? And those are two things that there's probably a legitimate interest now. It's been raised in the New Zealand public.
Yeah, did he intentionally mislead MSD by ticking the single box? Did he accidentally tick the single box? Did he in fact tick the correct box and it has been processed incorrectly?
Yeah.
All of these questions and more.
What a giant scandal. I don't think there would be a bigger scandal in New Zealand politics in the remainder of the campaign.
Except there have been demands, not unreasonably, that Winston Peters should release these forms, the high prince of transparency and rigour among politics, the pensions man, the
man whose mastermind topic
prince.
Is superannuation.
He should come clean completely on this.
Well, yes, for obvious reasons, there has been that call for him to, hand over whatever paperwork he has in the interest of transparency, which he is such an ardent advocate for. That should be done. However, as we have since learnt, because of how this story became public, there is perhaps good reason for not releasing that information if it helps him to form a case against whoever the possible leakers may be.
Right. We'll get onto that in 1 second. But just briefly first, there have been some calls, including from people within the Green Party, that this story should be probed with the same rigour that the Metiria Ture story was, and that the media, who were so relentless in trying to track down and interrogate the veracity of those claims, should be equally diligent on this one. Does that seem like a reasonable demand to you, Annabelle?
Well, I think, the media should treat everyone equally. However, in this case, it's slightly different because the ministry has said that the issue has been resolved to their satisfaction. So it's slightly different to Metiria in that regard. And also, it's unclear whether he intentionally or mistakenly, or through no mistake of his own, this error has occurred. So it's slightly different. And I think already we've seen that the tone is different anyway. There doesn't seem to be the same blood in the water type situation that we had with Metiria.
But why?
Well, because Winston Peters still holds the balance of power on all the current polling, and Metiria did not.
You mean that's in terms of the political pressure or the media pressure?
Political pressure, but that has a lot to do with the media pressure. The media needs somebody calling for a head in order to be able to pursue it in the normal course of events. We've seen a real kind of standoffishness, which from the National Party, which may have something to do with events that we're going to discuss soon. There's been quite a bit of obviously the Greens haven't commented at all, and the
Debs Mahuta Travis has.
No longer the special projects advisor with the Greens, with the departure of two of their top staffers last week, as they continue to sort of flounder electorally, I suppose. There is, now that it's been raised, if we go back and look at the history of allegations put to Winston Peters about the management of funds, he has not always given the full story after the first question. And I think there is a legitimate public interest in continuing to pursue answers to those questions. And the way that Winston Peters describes it, it should be relatively straightforward. One letter from MSD and then a letter advising about the outcome of their meeting.
Okay, so then the scandal, like the denouement in a Scooby-Doo episode, ripped off its mask and appeared to be a different scandal altogether, which is one about how did this information come to light. And it turned out pretty quickly. This is when
it finally did actually become #mother of all scandals.
It became distinctly more maternal.
How was the scandal birthed? It was birthed by the mother, yeah.
It was a mother by a different... No. Look, what happened, Ben? You got pretty steamed about this pretty quickly. Talk us through it.
So... we don't know who tipped off Lloyd Burr / Jenna Lynch at TV3 / Newshub. What we do know is there was an anonymous phone call made. But we also now know a bit more about who was apprised of Winston Peters' personal information in terms of his superannuation. It was revealed that Anne Tolley, the Minister of Social Development, was briefed by the Ministry of Social Development about the matter. Now we learn on July the 31st, and then she got a further update on August the 15th. We have also learned that the Minister of State Services, Paula Bennett, was briefed about the matter by the State Services Commissioner, Peter Hughes. And we also learned that the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff from one of those ministers, I think Tolley, learned about the issue.
Ben, do we know if they were briefed before or after Winston? Has that been clarified?
I think after the meeting.
After the meeting.
I saw an article today where he was saying it was that they knew before him.
Right. That could have been July the 31st. I mean, we're not clear on that. So... now, Bill English has denied that it was anyone in the National Party or in the Beehive. Of course, he's in no position to make that denial.
To be clear, he wasn't. Eagleson, the Chief of Staff, decided not to alert the Prime Minister to it, which in itself is kind of interesting.
That's right.
He deemed it to be sufficiently sensitive So
what's happened is we have seemingly dozens of people wandering around Wellington, all ignorant that each other know about this Peters situation. Paula Bennett said she did not tell anyone. That was a necessary caveat for her to make because of the issues with sort of information security in her office that were raised last year in regard to Te Puia Marae, where her now former staffer leaked information about the criminal record. The police investigation into a figure at Te Puia Marae. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have any answers. Bill English has said that he wants an investigation. We also obviously have officials, either at Inland Revenue, Ministry of Social Development, and the State Services Commission, who knew about this scenario. Yep.
There's questions about whether some might come from someone in IRD as well, which would be extremely serious.
That would be a criminal matter. But what's appalling, whether or not it turns out that the leak came from a beehive office, it seems beyond the pale that these ministers were, and so many were, briefed about this matter. The no surprises policy is just that. It's a policy. It's not a law. It's not a regulation. It's
introduced under Helen Clark.
Introduced under the Bolger government. For state-owned enterprises and Crown entities, and all this was originally set out in a letter to directors of these directors and board members of these organisations, which were operated at arm's length from the government. And so if you had a state-owned enterprise like Meridian Energy, all they had to do was report 4 times a year to the government, which owned it 100%, and other than that they operated independently. And so these were a way of basically the government being as well apprised of the operations of the companies it owned as shareholders in the normal market. It was basically continuous disclosure. So if Meridian were going to rack up the price of electricity to Rio Tinto and close the smelter in Te Reo Point, the government was entitled to a heads up that was what was happening.
And then there was mission creep, essentially.
More than mission creep. So first it migrated to the core civil service, which is government departments, the Ministry of Social Development, for example. And then this idea of, what became relevant for ministers to know, and also the way in which it was conveyed changed. So first of all, a much wider, this is over, the last 18 years now, a much wider swathe of information has now been sort of deemed to be relevant to ministers, and also the way in which people are advised has changed. So it used to be kind of a heads up, for instance, if I asked you, Toby, what are your plans for the weekend, you'd tell me, and that would be for my interest. If your wife asked you, Toby, what are your plans for the weekend, while she was standing next to a dripping tap, which has been driving her crazy, there's a certain level of expectation loaded into that question, in terms of how it will influence what your answer is and what you are actually going to do, and that's
when you're allowed to lie, basically.
Okay, just clarify.
Yeah.
So what's happened now is, for instance, in the old days, the Official Information Act, a lot of the problems that we have with the Official Information Act are the result of the no surprises policy. So it's reasonable enough that if a department is putting out 100 pages of statistics to a journalist under the OIA, that they would give a copy of that to the minister and say, this is being released to journalists, they'll probably ask you about it. What we have now is a situation where 5 or 6 days before that information is due to be released, it will be provided to the minister's office for comment, and that comment, as we've seen through a number of reports, will often be in the nature of feedback on what should or should not be included, with varying degrees of pressure depending on the subject.
So to cut to the chase of that, essentially it's become a heavily politicised process. Is that what you're saying? Is that the essence of it?
It's the interpretation of it.
The way that it's applied has mutated vastly away from the original intention, which is a friendly heads up to the government about what its independent agencies are doing and what they are doing operationally, into a kind of real-time dynamic reporting, which allows for more interference by ministers and their officers.
And in practice, in this case, the State Services Commissioner has been notified and asked to make a ruling on whether or not this was something that should be sent up.
Now, this is probably the worst
and he seems to have thought it through and gone, yeah. So, I mean, he's kind of, isn't he meant to be the firewall?
So he's
the firewall between the civil service and
the State Services Commission is there to enforce standards in the public sector, and one of those standards is neutrality and being apolitical, essentially. Civil servants should not be providing political advice or political intelligence to ministers. And Peter Hughes, who's the State Services Commissioner, is widely regarded as the best civil servant in Wellington, but he seems to have adopted this role of narc or informant for the government of the day, because what happened is they not only gave the green light for MSD to inform their Minister Antoli, but then Peter Hughes decided the right thing to do under No Surprises was to inform his minister, Paula Bennett, of his actions in advising MSD so that she wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Paula Bennett has nothing to do with superannuation or with social welfare or with Winston Peters. And this is just such an extraordinary spiralling out of control. It's almost like a parody.
And it has a few echoes, Annabelle, of something that we were talking about at the last election, which is dirty politics. We do not know how this information got out. We should stress that. And Bill English has made it very clear that he's been given assurances from his chief of staff and from the two ministers involved that they did not disseminate this information. And therefore, he's more or less implied that they're goners if they were found to have done so, right? I think that's pretty clear. But all the same, we're left in this situation where it seems to be that information has been fed out through an anonymous call from people who stand to gain from it in a very direct political sense.
I think it also raises important questions for journalists as well in terms of source management, because as a journalist, protecting your sources is obviously of the ultimate importance and utmost importance, and people go to jail to do so. But also it raises the question, what responsibility and obligations do we have to really question our sources and understand their motivations and require them to provide evidence of what it is that they're alleging before we act on these stories and break them. Because in this case, it appears that someone has been able to make an anonymous call. It's unknown whether or not they've provided any written evidence. Certainly none's been forthcoming in the media. So do we just take sources at face value or voice value, as the case may be, and run with them? And I think, as we've seen over the last couple of days, the story's developed into something far more important and significant, something that's really sort of potentially shaken the faith New Zealanders have, not in politicians per se, but in the state, as the kaitiaki of our important private information and how that information is shared and how policies can be manipulated to put people's political opponents at a disadvantage. I
mean, the government has an enormous range of powers to require people to give it information. And they hold huge amounts of data, and this is not just as a sort of de facto Ministry of Information for attacking the government's enemies. I mean, this is incredibly serious. Whether or not Tolly, Bennett, Eagleson leaked this, the fact that we have this situation where there is this sort of porous membrane where information from the civil service just seems to torrent in about individuals to the extent that it's seen as business as usual should be incredibly worrying for everyone. People on the right should be more worried. Imagine a Labour government, a Helen Clark government that had this kind of penetration into the civil service. So something has to be done at this point about the practice of No Surprises. It's gotten so far out of control that it's no answer to say, well, in this case, I don't think they leaked. They shouldn't have that opportunity.
It also gives credence to the concerns, groups had earlier this year when MSD was trying to compel NGOs to hand over the private information of potential clients and so on and so forth. And this is exactly, the sort of thing that can happen when your private information is misused.
And now we have Winston Peters on the warpath. He's turned defence into attack.
Talk about blowing up in your face, eh?
He's now.
It's such a weird political situation that we're in at the moment too, because ordinarily this sort of bombshell would just be fantastic for your political opponents, but in this case it's almost like everyone's in checkmate with each other and nobody can really come out and put the boot in. So it's a really unusual kind of place we're in at the moment.
Although I think Winston might be getting his boot shined right now because just as we were coming in here, I was reading a quote from him on the campaign trail in which he says, "This is humbug, it's tawdry, it's dirty, it's filthy," which is sort of classic Winston, and he's now, I think, reasonably enough,
he's become the martyr out of this.
He's going to turn this into a stick to beat the government.
Absolutely, he's going to be able to squeeze all the juice that he wants out of this, and in some ways he's become a martyr. I don't think that it will hurt him in the way it ultimately ended up hurting Matidia. I think a lot of his supporters probably claim superannuation even though they work full time, and that's a whole other debate that we can have. But Duncan Grieve wrote a really interesting piece on it on the spin-off yesterday, which is well worth a look. But I don't think it will hurt him. All it's going to do is give him more airtime and suck the wind out of National and Jacinda, and he'll get to look like he's been really hard done by and get to do long circular interviews that go nowhere and probably win a lot of sympathy and support.
Ben, you look like you're about to speak.
Oh, no, I was just...
resting.
But your resting face. In terms of what it does to that political debate, it strikes me that Jacinda Ardern is reasonably well placed and that she has attempted from the outset to go for a very, we've heard relentlessly positive ad infinitum, but she has refused to get stuck into that dirt. She's been very careful to try, and when the likes of Gareth Morgan or Peter Dunn have come at her response has been very much to be above the fray, take the moral high ground and say, I don't intend to engage in that. And that puts her in quite a good position. That very decision,
strong position.
Or just the character that means she's not inclined to that approach means she's quite well placed when something like this goes down.
Bill English said a couple of months ago, the important thing for this election was for his MPs to be disciplined and not to, what was the words, Ben? Not to be arrogant, or what was it?
Complacent.
Not to be complacent.
Not
and
to do the third term
wheels...
thing. I mean,
just fallen off.
It's worth saying of Bill English that he really does disapprove of any of that sort of thing. I mean, he is one of the few senior national ministers who, when the dirty politics scandal broke, he was visibly and vocally disapproving of that strategy, of that approach.
Yeah, and same with the Hollow Men. He is a very moral guy, a very straight shooter. That doesn't mean he knows everything that is happening within his party.
Sure, and he was on stage on Sunday when everyone was talking about the mother of all scandals. He had the mother of his children on the stage with him, and he had his daughter singing the national anthem, and he had his son doing Snapchats, and it was very much a family affair.
The rest of the kids occupying sort of rows 1 through 6.
There were a few gaps. I was there. There weren't 3,000 people there, but nor were there what I saw. I mean, I saw some people suggesting that it had been padded out and there was only one person in every 7 seats. It wasn't like that either. It was pretty well attended. It wasn't packed. It was a big crowd, They obviously had to try pretty hard to get Billmania going because they aren't in a position where they've been on the back foot horribly for years and years and years and finally have some champagne to open. But the sort of cornerstone of it was a policy on primary schools. For primary schools, there was a bit of maths there. There was a bit of languages there. There was a National Standards Plus thing there. Wasn't really a game-changing policy by any stretch, but do you feel as though who were they trying to talk to, Ben?
I thought it was interesting that Nikki Kaye introduced the Prime Minister and was also...
Nikki Kaye introduced Paula Bennett, who introduced the Prime Minister.
Sorry, yeah. But also was with the Prime Minister announcing the education policy. And Nikki, obviously, Nikki beat Jacinda Ardern twice in Auckland Central. Yes. Is the exact same age, I think, and represents that kind of generational change that National sort of lacks in comparison with the Jacinda effect, Jacinda mania, Jacinda Rama, whatever. In terms of the policy itself, obviously one that they just kind of threw together in the week preceding. Hit the right sort of emotional buttons, very consonant with their campaign themes of a more inclusive society, people of different shapes, colours, all running together aimlessly somewhere in the South Island.
They're all looking for where's a boat? Is anybody got a boat?
Boot camp kids that once they'd done the boot camp, they were all beautiful with bouncy shiny hair and stuff. No. Okay.
But at least it was a new kind of policy initiative. It wasn't kind of scraping that same barrel as boot camps and road.
It's a good idea. It was a little bit
underdone.
Turns out nebulous.
Turns out, 1 hour of second language teaching a week, which
at some point in the future.
I don't know, do they have to use Duolingo to kind of remember between the weeks? Or
the line that got the biggest cheer by far in the speech was, to paraphrase, Labour just want to treat hard-working New Zealanders as an ATM machine.
Yeah, and
there was a genuine, that one was the loyal National Party members that were there still feel that strongly. That's still a sort of hardwired view about the Labour Party, whether you believe it to be right or wrong, and it just struck me that's why, even though they don't want to be seen to be running an attack campaign, that's how they win, isn't it? That's how they...
Although, to be fair, Labour wants to use tourists as ATMs as well, I think they would counter with...
Yeah, did we talk about that last week? I can't remember. Did we talk about Labour's tax approach, which is a slightly... curious one, and that I think we must have done.
We kind of touched on it.
We did. We wandered around.
What did we
wandered around in the uncertain fog.
She hadn't ruled out capital gains at that point. Pre-fu had just come out. And she hadn't ruled out the income tax.
After that, she ruled out income tax increases.
Yeah.
After Paula Bennett's introduction, which was quite something, it was kind of very high octane, lots of waving of hands and finishing every sentence with "yeah" to the crowd. Bill English said in his speech that this is a strong national team energised by new ideas. Doesn't really feel like they're bursting with new ideas? Does there need to be does there need to be something that's, I don't know, whether it's crystallising existing stuff, or I sort of feel as though this is the point in the campaign when someone announces a national conversation about something,
Yeah, well, notice that with the second language in primary schools policy, there was no timeline. They refused to put an arbitrary date on it. So it'll probably come to land in about the same time as predator-free New Zealand, carbon-neutral New Zealand.
Train to the airport.
If you guys were thinking about going anywhere, stick around for 2040 because it is going to be something.
Incredible, yeah.
Even the flag referendum, that's one that you can pull out, gets lots of airtime. People talk about it heaps. It's sort of a non-event, really. It's not that big a deal, but it's something that you can sort of, hoist up and people stare up at it. But there's not even anything like that this time.
Referendum on the national anthem. We could have a new national anthem.
Good idea. Tell Bill. Call him after this.
Not a Māori one.
Why not?
I don't think that would be the proposal they were looking for 4 weeks out from the election. With the rural base.
One that gives equal mana to like a Korean anthem and a Chinese anthem that can be taught in all the primary schools.
I'm just right now. I'm just composing the social line to promote this podcast, and it's going to be Ben Thomas. If we have a new national anthem, not a Māori one. it's going to go well for you and your online presence. You're having such a great time on the internet lately, Ben.
These are really not
beautiful.
Those aren't my personal views. That is just where I think the rural national MPs would be.
You're very much like the shepherd of Twitter at the moment. You crop up occasionally with, you've left to one side your craft brewing community, and you're now gathering the flock of the tweeters and making everyone feel better about their work.
Yeah, reminding us to all play nicely with each other on Twitter.
I think everyone deserves to have a good time online.
Kia ora.
Speaking of having a good time, you and I, Ben, were at the minor parties debate on Saturday. You were meant to be there,
I was
Annabelle.
meant to be there, but I had a fevering 2-year-old all night, so I didn't make it. Did you give my apologies to Nick?
Nope. What? You only sent me that message halfway through the debate. It was a good debate, I thought. What did you think, Ben?
I thought, well, look, disclaimer, do a bit of work for ACT, and David Seymour was in the debate.
He produced his book. He produced his book, and it reminded me of the time John Polino in a debate on The Nation produced his book too. And you suddenly there was like a beam of light that emerged from the book. It was like in Teletubbies or something, or the Book of Revelations, something like that. And I just kind of felt blinded by the light of truth, and everything was different from that point on.
On the days when David's busy, Ben actually signs the autograph copies and sends them out.
Do you provide us that part of your work for David Seymour, that you sent him suggested notes for signing books?
I can't talk about client matters, but I do want to say I'm sorry to anyone that I accidentally I convinced to be a libertarian under false pretenses.
What were you going to say about the debate? Did you watch the debate, Annabelle?
I did watch the debate.
You watched it on the television?
Yeah, it was interesting.
What do you think? How did it look to you?
I thought Lisa did a great job.
Lisa Owen did a very good job.
That she is. I thought...
Let's just clarify before Sean Plunkett comes down here with a trudgeon that Lisa Owen was not called a femo-fascist.
Gareth Morgan did not intend to call
I think
Lisa
she started
Owen
a new girl gang called
femo-fascist.
Femo-fascist. There's like a patch.
I'm not saying she's not a femo-fascist, right? Let me be very clear about that. I'm just saying that Gareth Morgan didn't call her a femo-fascist.
Well, look, I think if you read the transcript, he clearly did. And if you watch the video, he clearly did. But I accept that he did not intend to call her a femo-fascist. And that was not what he was trying to get across. He was trying to get across that Lisa Owen was a chill girl, and that... not like those femo-fascists giving him trouble online.
Yeah, that was Gareth Morgan's one. He was sort of relatively contained apart from that one line.
I felt he was the only guy the only person who underperformed in the debate. I was impressed by Hone, very impressed by Marama, obviously. She's a very magnetic figure. James Shaw improved on his previous week or two.
I disagree. I thought James Shaw was really strong on the Māori TV debate a couple of days before. And again, I thought he turned in another strong performance on Saturday. I think Hone, for me, was the standout. I thought there were some flashes of the Hone of old, except for when he forgot his immigration policy.
When he did his line, which he's done before, but when challenged on where he's going to pay for it, to be able to say, don't bring a spreadsheet along to a starving child. I mean, that is it's a very affecting and powerful line, right?
I think too, like we've heard it so much this election, how are you going to pay for this, how are you going to pay for that? The truth is the average Joe Bloggs voter doesn't really care how anything gets paid for or spend a lot of time worrying about it. That's just something that, I think most New Zealanders would think it's probably just something that politicians say to each other to try and undermine each other's policies. So I think that was, an effective response by him. I also like the line about, are you a feminist? And he said, I am the son of Te Te Whai Harawira. It was another great comeback.
And there was no Winston Peters. He had decided not to take part, which... I don't know. Some people thought that was a very bad idea. In a way, there was a sense about that debate when I was watching it that they were all scrapping for their lives. I mean, there's a weird irony that the only one there who can be sure, really, with any confidence, with any great confidence that they'll be in Parliament is David Seymour, and he's got a percentage, despite the fine work of Excelsior, no one is going to vote for his party. It's sort of a weird thing. They were all just desperately gasping for that political oxygen, no? I mean, they're all at risk.
And the irony is that, Winston refused to go on the debate. He refused to go on the Māori TV debate, and he's ended up with more airtime and oxygen than all of them put together.
Yeah. So. But I don't know. I mean, I can see the argument each way, but I can see that you could rationalise that. Why would you want to appear with a bunch of that lot when you are clearly so much more assured in your footing electorally than they are?
I just think it shows humility myself when you participate in those sorts of debates. It shows that you don't take your support for granted, that you take the election seriously. I don't think you cover yourself in glory by not turning up to debates, although, as it turns out, it hasn't hurt him, but...
A lot of it is about branding. This is why, of course, the minor party leaders are so eager to appear on screen with the major party leaders.
Yep.
This is why...
and the major party leaders are so keen not to appear on screen with the rest.
Yeah, that's right, because, you kind of find your own level, and if you're Bill English would diminish himself by kind of scrapping amongst the minnows.
It's a bit like you and I sitting here in this room with Annabelle, really, isn't it? It's great for us.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's be honest, her brand is suffering. but we bribe her with, what have we got today? M&Ms.
M&Ms and favourites. So spoiled.
The big debates, the big kids' debates, begin on Thursday evening, by which time the very land upon which we stand will have shifted politically, no doubt. I expect we'll have had two polls by then. Who knows what else might have befallen the election campaign? But how's it going to shape up? How's it going to go? People are going to be watching.
Jacinda will win the debate. That's my. I picked Mayweather McGregor correctly, and I've picked this correctly. Jacinda will win the debate because, for the same reason that in the past few elections, David Cunliffe won the first debate against Key. I can't even remember who it was. Phil Goff won the first debate against Key. Key won the first debate against Clark. And I think even Brash won the first debate against Clark way back in 2005, because the challenger gets so much leeway from the analysts and commentators who comment on these things that anything less than a crushing defeat is seen as a win or a moral victory. So Jacinda will be declared the winner after this debate. Whether she actually wins the debate is a little less certain, but there's probably a reasonable chance of that. It's going to be very difficult for Bill English to show a better command of policy and issues without appearing patronising or aggressive. Not because that's how he is, but because, just because of the way these things are framed.
I agree. And I think, English is not a naturally charismatic communicator in the way that Ardern is.
I mean, if we go back to that minor party leaders debate, I don't think anyone would claim that Marama Fox made the best debating points or dominated the policy discussion, but she was unanimously declared the winner by the commentators on stage because she's a warm, engaging, energetic presence.
She just fills up the room in the way that the others stand behind the podium.
An amazing presence, an amazing speaker. And I think, we may see that again on Thursday.
The interesting thing about it is I think that we possibly forget, because we're following everything reasonably closely, is that a lot of people who watch that debate really will still know almost nothing about Jacinda Ardern. They will have seen some clips on the TV, they will have heard her on the radio a little bit here and there, but this is actually a proper chunk of time. I mean, it's an hour, I guess, long or longer. It's been prime time on TV1 with Michael Hosking running it, which perhaps we'll just leave that to one side. Do you want to talk about that, Annabelle? No. And so I sort of feel as though I think I wouldn't be too hasty in thinking that it's Jacinda Ardern has got this one, because I do think it is quite a hurdle for her. I mean, I think she's done enormously well so far. She's barely put a foot wrong. She hasn't been trapped as some have tried to trap her, as they've gone harder on interrogating policy and so on. Also, I think that there is a danger that we now see Bill English in contrast to Jacinda Ardern, he's a very effective communicator too. He's not the guy from 2002. He's not he's not an embarrassing, struggling, monosyllabic dude. He can do a decent job.
And the long form suits him. Bill English is not a soundbite guy. Bill English is a long conversation guy.
I felt there were times in his long interview with Guy on Morning Report where he struggled actually.
Yeah.
And where he had to kind of take back, like, you know, he is honest, to be fair, honest Bill. There was times when he would say stuff and then almost sort of try to pull the words back. So I'm not sure if long form is his strong suit. I think obviously he's going to be much stronger than her when it comes to issues like finance, but when it comes to things like the issue of homelessness and child poverty, those sorts of things, he will struggle.
Yes. And her great strength, I think, which is that she'll very likely go in with the, hug him to death approach, which I touched on before, which was...
They're both hugging each other to death.
Well,
It's
he
such
can't...
a weird election. Everyone's so polite and tiptoeing around each other. It's
But the thing with Peter Dunne, I thought was amazing when he went out with having a go at Jacinda Ardern, the smile and wave, which was really a kind of a flipping of the bird on the way out the door.
I actually found what he said more offensive than what Gareth had said about lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really ungracious, underhanded exit.
It was ungracious, and it would have been the thing that most of us, I think, would have said was, that's pretty ungracious. This is what I'm doing. That's really not an appropriate way to... But she didn't.
She cuddled
what
him.
she said was... What I want to say is Peter Dunne has given an enormous service to, and, praised him to the hills, and that's completely disarming. Yeah. And so I think there might be a little bit of that with Bill English too in the debate. There might be some praise for Bill English even, and it'd be an interesting tactic to see how, and it makes it much harder to do the show me the money, because they're going to try and go hard on the taxes, and if the tactic is to try and find a weakness in the Labour Party leader that is to do with the policy detail, whether or not that will be as effective as it was against Gough or Cunliffe.
Look, I think it'll be the most polite debate in political living history in New Zealand. I think it will be extremely amicable, extremely courteous.
Ben Thomas doesn't know this yet, but he'll have more thoughts for us shortly after the debate. I'll try and convince Annabelle Lee to do that. Just log on to thespinoff.co.nz for short, sharp takes on the debate on Thursday night. Thanks very much for listening to us. Review us and rate us on iTunes if you've stayed this long. You might as well. Love you lots. Thanks, Jose Barbosa.
Thanks, Jose.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spinoff. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.